This is a special Festa Italiana interview on the subject of Italo Balbo, his flight in 1933, and we have with us historian Don Fiore, who will give us the broad outlines of the flight. Don, tell us a little bit about it, and what was the big deal about this mass flight? Hadn't we had Lindbergh in the 1920s?
Well, that's it exactly, this mass flight. The nature of flights up to that time was centered around the individual daring do of individual aviators. You had Lindbergh. At the very time when Balbo was flying, you had Willie Post making his trip around the world. You had Groundway Gordon, people like this. What the Italian flight represented was not unlike the NASA space program today. It might sound like a bit of a stretch, but it was a mass flight, a tightly organized flight of many planes. It wasn't one individual hopping into his plane and completing the feed. It was a masterfully handled. That's what made the sensation.
How many were there? How many planes?
There were 24 planes, one in reserve.
And how many on each?
Four men on each plane. There was a pilot, a co-pilot, a flight engineer, and a radio man.
Okay, and they flew. They didn't fly directly?
No, and that's much to their credit, because Balbo wasn't taking any risk in this operation. The world wasn't looking for this in 1933. They wanted reassurances of control, science, technology, and that's what this flight was about. It was made in stages, very careful stages, where we left Orbitello and they landed in Amsterdam to...
That's one day?
One day from, right, to Amsterdam, that's a small trip, okay? Then to Londonderry and to Iceland. There was a layover in Iceland because of bad weather. Like I say, wasn't taking any risks.
In Reykjavik?
Right.
Okay. They stayed over an extra day in Reykjavik?
We don't call it Iceland anymore. I'm sorry. Back then it was Iceland.
Okay.
They stayed, I believe, over a week. Waiting for weather to calm down. And they had set up a base in Greenland for an emergency landing station. It turned out they didn't need it. They were able to shoot straight to Carbide. This was by far, for any aviator, the most terrible.
How did they know what the weather was going to be like?
They had constant. This is why it was such a fabulous thing for the time. There was nothing like this had been done before. Balbo had established picket ships, support ships along the route. The Royal Italian Navy supplied some. And there was constant radio communication with the planes, and they never really on their own, where they had weather information constantly, what to expect to have. The flight was made in formation, tight formation, very close formation, which was remarkable for that distance to carry on like that.
Not quite the Blue Angels, but
Close
that tradition.
At that time, very close to it.
So Cartwright, I never heard of it, but it must be in Canada.
It's in Newfoundland. Okay, and then from there was a short flight over and then
To Montreal.
Montreal, Chicago.
And they came from Montreal on the 15th of July
Straightway.
to Chicago.
Straightway. They got in Chicago in the afternoon.
And what was the reception?
Reception, well, everybody was waiting for it because the newspapers were carrying every step of the way. And there was the entire lakeshore was lined up with hundreds of thousands of people. The Soldiers Field, where the aviators were presented when they finally landed, they took a little bit of the time to moor the boats, and they were very careful with the flying boats. There were 60,000 people in Soldier Field when they finished. We sat very patiently for quite some time for the aviators making their appearance. So, Chicago went all out. Actually, the whole country did, because of technological achievement.
What did this mean for Italian Americans?
Well, obviously, in an era when Italians were similarly to today, had either they were poor fruit vendors or criminals. All of a sudden, you have this entirely different depiction of aviators, great heroes. In those days, aviation was, the astronauts of back then. That was, a great way of the future. And they have these, to see Italians, I don't want to say adulation, but close to it, by the Americans, by Anglo-Saxons, for their accomplishment. It was just a wonderful wonder drop, I think, for the self-esteem of Italian Americans.
And so there were thousands of Italian Americans out there, and...
Oh, yeah. Very well represented. Very well represented.
And then, so what did Balbo do while he was here, the troops?
It was a dizzying time. They had a program. The Italian Americans, I guess, it sponsored a number of different societies. All wanted to have a pamphlet with Balbo or some representative, and they couldn't possibly do do that in their short stay here, so what they did was all the Italian societies got together and held an Italian society banquet. There was one night, the federal government, gave them a banquet. The Royal Italian government gave them a banquet. The city of Chicago gave them a banquet and reception. It was just a constant something going on, to the point where Balbo, towards Monday, said, ask please no more, because we've got to get back in those planes and fly, and I'm not going to be in shape for that.
What about the women of Chicago? What was their reaction?
Well, most of the formal receptions were limited. The invitations were to the pilots and the co-pilots, and the enlisted men, flight engineers. They were more free to go out on their own, and so they really hit the town. And I understand that there were several long-lasting romances created over that weekend here. As far as the women journalists, people like that, they all thought that Balbo was probably the most dashing, attractive figure of the aviation world.
What happened after? When did you leave on? You came here on a Saturday night?
Right, by Wednesday morning they were going, right. And from there they went to New York. They had another grand reception in New York. They stayed there a few days. Ticker tape parade. They appeared at Madison Square. And then after that was all business. Then get back over the ocean.
Well, lunch with Franklin Roosevelt.
I'm sorry, they also went to Washington, D.C. They had luncheon with the president. They visited Arlington Cemetery. It's a traditional place to meet them. Welcome soldier. Standard things like that.
So, to sum it up then, what's the significance of all this, and what was the purpose behind it, too?
The purpose, there was probably a dozen stated purposes and unstated. One naturally was probably the most pronounced purpose was to reaffirm the friendship between the United States and Italy, which at that time was still very good. Other ones were to promote interest in aviation and intercontinental air travel. The Italians felt that this would be a major, which it was, and unfortunately they didn't follow up on that for economic reasons, because it was a very expensive show to put on. This thing here was prohibitively expensive, so much so that no other nation was willing to put out that amount of money to stage something like this, like the Italians did. So those were basically the purposes: promote aviation, promote intercontinental air travel. Of course, to promote Italy as a upcoming technological leader, which is the image they're trying to push very strongly.
And of course, Mussolini is promoting...
And Mussolini as the cause behind this. Certainly was mentioned quite a few times.
What happened to Balbo?
Balbo, when he returned to Italy, in a matter of months, he was relieved of his position as air minister. Reason being, the unstated reason being, his popularity. There was probably no Italian as popular internationally as he was at that time. Okay, I mean, tremendous.
That would leave Mussolini out.
Right. And so he was appointed governor of Libya, which got him, in the backwater colonies. And it was a sop, more or less, to him. I mean, that's what it was mostly viewed. He had made a lot of friendships with the West, with the British, and especially with the Americans. So as Italy moved closer and closer to an alliance with the Germans, Balbo became more and more alienated from the fascist inner circle. He was a strong opponent against the war. He didn't want to see Italy unite itself against Germany. Balbo died and was shot down over Tobruk in 1941 by Italian guns. It's a question that, still deeply, was it intentional, was it not, was it a mistake?
Has there ever been a film depiction of the life of Balbo or the
No.
Balbo flight?
No, but I think you might see that because in Italy today, I think they're getting beyond the point where Balbo's a controversial, fascist figure, and they're looking at it more as an historical. The Italian Air Force Historical Department for years, it was very hard to find anything on Balbo. It was all hidden. It was almost technology. And now their studies and books are being written and research is being done. So who knows? I certainly would enjoy research something like that.
Okay, well, thanks very much to historian Don Fiore. Broad outlines of the life and times of Italo Balbo and Balbo's flight. Thank you. Okay, we have with us here Tony Sorrentino, who's been involved in the Italian-American community for many years and is now the president of the Italian Cultural Center. Tony, were you there?
Yes, I was. I was a young man, about 20 years old, I would say, and lived on the near west side, the old Taylor Street neighborhood, and not far, walking distance actually, to Grand Park and the Century of Progress. And it was a memorable occasion, to say the least. It made one feel proud to be Italian, especially during those times when Italians were discriminated against, a lot of prejudice, and so forth. And so, having a tremendous event like this, focusing on the great country of Italy, was very uplifting and very inspiring to us as young men.
Chicago hails Balbo fleet. Wow.
That's right. I remember
July 16th, 1933. That's wonderful. So you were out, you were in the crowd? What was
yes.
it like?
Oh, yes. Well, there were hundreds of thousands of people. It reminds me of the recent Pope's visit here in Denver. Tremendous crowds. It was very festive, very exciting.
Were you too
event.
young to have been invited to any of the
Yes,
banquets and
yes,
such?
I didn't. I was just belonged to a social group on the near west side. I was not involved in the more prominent Italian-American activities, so I was not involved in those things.
But it made you feel good about yourself?
I certainly did. I recall, you know, this front page of the Tribune very vividly. I have the original copy of it. Another edition said Colonel McCormick, the editor of the Tribune, welcome, and was one of the prominent citizens of Chicago, and greeted him and welcomed him and praised him to the skies. And it's ironic that about 1946, Tribune led a campaign to eliminate the name of Balbo Street. By the way, they named, shortly after the World's Fair, they named, I think, 8th Street Balbo Drive.
Yeah, well, on the day that he was here,
that's right, yeah,
Kelly,
That's
Mayor
right.
Kelly
Kelly.
did that.
That's
And,
right.
so that was in honor of Balbo.
That's
and,
right. Then by 1946, Tribune led a drive to, and the City Council, to change the name to Walden Drive, who was a nephew of Colonel McCormick. And then most recently, within the last year or so, again they tried to change it to Mandela Drive. And on each occasion, a group of Italian leaders appeared before the City Council and vigorously, vehemently protested the change of the name for obvious reasons, that his contribution was historic, it was unprecedented, it was a lasting contribution, and regardless of political views that may have changed over the decades, you don't change, relegate someone to obscurity and take away from them the contribution which they made.
So he was a hero for Italian Americans.
Oh,
He was a hero for the whole city then.
Oh, absolutely, right. Anglo-Saxons, everybody in Chicago, and of course the Italians were extremely proud, and it increased their prestige.
Do you remember the anti-fascist demonstration against the
Not
Balbo?
at the time of Balbo's
Yeah.
right here? No, I don't remember that. Was it?
Yeah, well, they had some flyers and leaflets that they got from an airplane saying that Balbo was involved in the original violence upon which the fascist movement was founded. So there was a tiny minority in the Italian community that was not happy with it.
Well, yes, that's right, yeah. But there was, during that period, like I recall.
Do you remember actually seeing him or seeing the planes come down?
No, from a distance. No, I was never fortunate to have it.
Were you in Soldier Field? Were you at the fairgrounds?
Right along Michigan Avenue, and of course the grounds of the Century of Progress, the Italian Pavilion. So we saw him only from a distance.
Okay, well, thanks a million, Tony Sorrentino, the president of the Italian Cultural Center. He was there, 1933, July 15th, the landing of Italo Balbo. Our next guest is Father Gino Dalpiaz, the director of the Italian Cultural Center. Father, you were in the crowd too in July 1933.
I'll tell you, it's one of my earliest boyhood memories, one of the most pleasant. My dad brought me down. I was 7 years old at the time. We were living in Melrose Park. And we went down there. I don't remember crowds. I just remember looking out on a beautiful lake that night. It must have been such a beautiful day. It was in the evening, I think, at sunset. And I could see those white planes bobbing up and down in the lake like seagulls. And they seemed so gleamingly white, at least in my memory as a boy. And they were on such deeply blue water, and the sky was blue. That's all I remember. I remember that I was just overpowered and awed by those 23 or 24 planes out there on the water. I didn't see people. I didn't see Balbo. Maybe I did, I don't know. But I must have been so taken up with the planes. And that's all I remember. This is apparently the plane, and as I look at it, after 60 years, they were remarkable machines. Even now, they look gleamingly white and powerful, almost human. And it is really a remarkable tribute to Italy that they were able to do this 60 years ago.
Don't you remember people telling you after you were 7-year-old when you saw it? Did they refer to it years later, or grew up and be like Balbo, or was it part of the thing?
No, I don't know. It was just a chapter in my life, a short, sweet chapter in my life, one of the earliest in my life, and that was it. So I really don't have much to tell you. I mean, nothing historical, but
you were there.
I was there. That's right, and I was there, and I can still remember being there, and I can still remember the excitement of a little boy holding his daddy by the hand and looking out there. We didn't go to Chicago or to the lake very often from Melrose Park, so maybe it may have been my first time looking at the lake for all I know. But it was just a beautiful moment in my life, and I'm sure it must have been a great moment in the life of Chicago. Why, after 60 years, Chicago still remembers that episode, that experience so much is still a bit mysterious. Balbo and his flyers left a powerful memory of themselves in the history of Chicago, even to this day. There's not only Balbo Drive and all the rest. So,
well, there's that monument that Mussolini sent a year later from Ostia Antica that is on Lakeshore Drive across the street from the stadium in Soldier Field.
So I was like Tony Sorrentino. I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody noticed me, but I noticed that.
I imagine there were thousands of fathers and young children there.
Because if they were only there from Saturday to Wednesday, I'm sure that place must have been just teeming with people. But as I said, it was a little love affair between me and the planes and nobody else. And I shut out everybody else, at least in my memory. And that's all I remember. Remember these planes, 24. I didn't see the flyers. I just saw the water, the planes, and the sky.
Well, that's a wonderful story. Father Gino Dalpiaz, director of the Italian Cultural Center. Our next guest is Mr. Gus Lazzarini, who was a young man in the 1930s and was called upon to be Italo Balbo's interpreter. Mr. Lazzarini, tell us about your experience with Italo Balbo in 1933.
Yeah. Well, the year was 1933, and Chicago was celebrating a century of progress, and they had an exposition at the lakefront. Okay. Whether it was Balbo or the Italian government that decided to do this ride, I say it in Italian, it's right. I do not know, but I do know that at the time, aviation was something in which all nations contributed, and some they did it to a terrific degree, others instead were left behind.
What about you, though? What about you down in Chicago?
Well, I was working in 1933. They had the fair called A Century of Progress. I was without any job or anything, and I used to go to the council, Castruccio, every day, ask for a job, and there was never no chance. When the fair opened up, I had no problem whatsoever to find a job in the Italian pavilion.
So you worked in the Italian pavilion?
In the Italian pavilion.
Okay, now what did that pavilion look like?
Huh?
What did the pavilion look like?
The Italian pavilion was a building that was erected by an Italian designer called Capraro.
Capraro?
Capraro, yeah.
And what did it look like?
It looked like the symbol of the fascist insignia.
Uh-huh.
It had the fascio Vittorio on top, reproduced, and then to give you the picture that you were going into something Italian at the time. Once you enter the pavilion, you were just caught into a table after table after table of cheapy jewelry.
Okay. And did it look like an airplane or an airplane tail?
Yeah.
That's
The
what I
aesthetic
was,
was the sagoma. How do you say sagoma? The appearance of an airplane.
Of an airplane, okay.
That's
now,
how it looked like.
who asked you to interpret for Balbo? We see this picture that we were watching earlier. There's a Italo Balbo, there's NBC here.
It was.
This is
I knew that it was coming, and I was working for an Italian Jew that was selling this cheap jewelry.
Okay.
Yeah, and I said, look, Balbo is coming. I would like to take half a day off. And Mr. Behar told me, yes, I'll let you go, but I'm going to dock you the half a day.
Oh, okay. So we didn't have such good relations. Then you got the opportunity to
So I ran upstairs. Like a plain nobody, only I went to go black in the morning and I bought a black shirt.
Oh, so you have a black shirt on, okay. Okay.
I bought a black shirt and I bought also a scarf to put around here, to feel complete.
Okay, so
I
you were
went out
dressed
there
for the fire.
and it was coincident. Balbo, we knew that he was going to speak. They were coming. There were 100, and the pavilion, Italian pavilion downstairs, had all these table booths selling this junk stuff. Okay. Then there were 2 sets of steps that you go up there to the podium, to up on top there. And I went up on top, and not Castruccio, the council, but the ambassador.
Is it Rossi? Is it Rossi?
I forgot the name of the
Rosso.
Augusto Rosso.
Okay.
Augusto Rosso. And he called me over, and he said, you look like you're knowledgeable enough. Would you feel that you translate the Balbo speech?
So it was right on the spur of the moment.
Right off like that. I didn't know him, he didn't know me, but he said, I feel that you can do it. And I said, why not? And boom, guts, right along there. And here is Balbo talking. I remember his first sentence. He said, we left Reykjavik this morning at 11:40.
But he spoke in Italian.
Huh? In Italian.
Okay, well.
Italian. and I was to translate, and I translate to the people. See that NBC?
Yeah,
C
exactly.
is left off, but NBC was recording this, and I translated in English as easy as pie, and I said just what Balbo said. Then Balbo went into technicality and the weather, that they were hindered, how he and his squadrilla, the squadrilla were 10. There were 3 playing the front, the left, and the side. And he was the leader, the number 1, up to number 10. There were 100. And if you go today, 60 years or something away, and you go see the motor and how big it was, the motor wasn't any bigger than this picture.
So the things were not that big.
Huh?
They weren't that big.
Yeah, you know, because they had left and right, you understand? Left and right, because it was a hydroplane. The plane couldn't land it on land, they would have wrecked.
Okay.
They had to have water.
And then it splashed down in the
Yeah,
water.
yeah.
What about the space inside?
The space inside, like I told you, the seat in which I sit was smaller than held 2 men. The first in command, the pilot, and the telegraphista, the one that also was an assistant pilot. I feel that he was bigger than the pilot because not only he could, in an emergency, take over and drive, but he was also taking weather reports, this and that, and each one of the 3, they were flying in 3, the head man, left and right, and they were reporting to each other the altitude, how cold it is, what they were to expect. It was fantastic. When you project this 60 years ago, when aviation was in its infancy, we as Italians, we had a Depinedo, but a Depinedo that couldn't listen to logic or logistics. We had our famous aviator, help me the name.
Well, Balbo?
No, the American
Oh,
aviator.
Lindbergh, yeah.
Lindbergh. That the press called him the Pazzo Volante, the crazy flyer, because he took off from New York and went to France.
Yeah.
But in those days, in order to push aviation, you have to have people, but not only but the faith that we could go intercontinent, you know.
Yeah.
And in fact, Balbo, because of so many people, proved to the world that aviation was not the
Well,
guts
just
of
for
some-
crazy people and
Yeah.
gutsy people, it could be an everyday thing.
And
that's-
also,
that's
we
what
must
people-
say that behind it all, don't forget the Ducci.
Okay, well, Mussolini inspired us. Now, tell me, did you shake hands with Balbo? Did he say anything to you after you did the... How long was his speech that you translated?
Well, I was very close to him, and I was instigated by not Castruccio, the council. Castruccio, the council, never said nothing, but the ambassador,
Russo.
Augusto Rosso, he's the one that called me and he said, "Say, you look smart enough. Do you feel that you can translate the speech?" I said, "Why not? I figure it's easy for me." And Balbo was talking in Italian, and he was talking right my way because he was saying, he was a phraseologist, you know, a phrase, and then he breathed and stopped.
He would do one sentence, and then you would in
Yeah,
Italian?
yeah, he was saying in Italian. He began and he said, "Abbiamo lasciato questa mattina Rajaway alle 11:40. Il tempo non era troppo bello, non prometteva. Io come primo comandante ai miei 3 dicevo, coraggio ragazzi, che il tempo davanti a noi è più bello e non c'è da avere temenza alcuna."
And then you said in English?
Yeah, and I was saying in English, because Balbo said it like this. It was a phraseologist. He had no continuity. He was telling things. And he was an inspiration to his 3 people. The plane were Macchi Caproni. The year after that, the ladies, the wives of the Macchi and the Caproni came on a visit themselves. and we had a ball talking.
What did your friends think after they saw you up there translating?
Well,
for-
I felt elated, and there's no question about it. And then I became very close with a lieutenant commander of squadron number 5. His name was Squaglia, and he was right from Lucca. When I read the list of where the flyer were coming from, it was all of it from Piedmont to Sicily.
There were 100 men.
They all came with true Italian enterprise. But the majority of them had served under Balbo in Libya. You understand? Now, why was it ever so great? Because aviation was in its infancy. Who we had that inspired us other than De Pinedo, the Italian aviator. But De Pinedo was an undisciplined man. He took off and he wanted to go to Argentina. He took off, he
Yeah,
did it.
okay.
But
Okay, what about, how did this change your life for you?
how?
How did this change your life?
Oh.
How was your life different after the
Well,
Italo Balbo came
Well,
and you were
I
translated?
felt that to me, right there and then, I didn't think as an opportunity, but it came to me. It just came like that. And if it wasn't for Augusto Rosso, the ambassador, no one would have told me. In fact, the Italian Monsieur Behar, an Italian Jew, see, when I asked him for half a day off, he said, yes, you can go up
Yeah,
there,
but he didn't
but
want
I dock you the
Yeah.
afternoon.
Okay, but did your friends, your relatives, did they want to shake your hand?
It was the talk of the town in the community and all that. But don't forget, the Italians were divided. Not everybody embraced fascism like I embraced it. I was born, you can say, with fascism. I wanted to go and march on Rome. I put on a black shirt and a sweater under the black shirt, only to be caught at Bagni di Lucca. The priest from my hometown was coming back. Something happened to the train, and the mother of Dino Donini, my friend, and I were burning up the airline. The
Your
airlane.
mother wouldn't let you go. So there you are, huh? Very young man. How
Well,
old were you? In
No,
1933?
naturally,
You were 20 years old?
I was 23.
23?
I was 23.
And Balbo
And Balbo, they were 100 of the best looking men that I could see, and gutsy the way they were. And I struck a friendship with Lieutenant Squaglia. He was one of the commander, and he was from my hometown in Lucca, from the province of it. And they used to stay at the Belmont Hotel, and I went with him browsing around. We went to Holy Name Cathedral. I stood at a tent, during the entire mess. I don't know whether they did that to give it as an example or something, but did you ever listen to an entire mass standing up?
A
with
sermon
everyone?
too, huh? Well, that's a wonderful story, Mr. Lazzarini. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for letting us use
It's
the
something-
pictures in the exhibit, and it's just been
And
wonderful.
we all ought to feel honored for this event. 60 years ago, how many nations would dare such an enterprise?
Thanks much.
General Italo Balbo, 37 years old, one of the world's youngest air ministers, was Italy's air minister, and one of the few air ministers in the world who actually knew how to fly a plane. He was a very robust leader. He hammered the Royal Italian Air Force into one of the strongest, most respected organizations, military organizations in the world, aeronautical organizations. Balbo came up with the idea of, early in the 1930s, of staging a transatlantic flight, a mass flight of a squadron of Italian planes over the Atlantic. The occasion would be the World's Fair in Chicago. That would be the destination. The flight was very masterfully planned, a technological triumph. It was conducted in stages with plenty of ground support, not unlike the modern NASA programs. That distinguished it from the flights of individual aviators that leaned more towards, relied more on their own initiative and daring to do. This was more of a well-planned organization exercise. Outline is as seen. The aircraft used on the flight was a Savoia Marchetti S-55. It was one of at least top products, a superior example of Italian technology. It was of wood construction, which makes its aerodynamic lines all the more admirable. It was plywood and ash, very powerfully motorized with a pusher-puller propeller arrangement. Isotta Fraschini 750 horsepower engines. It's quite an airplane. Outstanding example of Italian design. The participants were commissioned and non-commissioned officers of the Royal Italian Air Force, and then underwent many months of rigorous training, a wide program of academics they studied in preparation to the flight. They weren't even allowed visits from their wives or families during the training period. They were the cream of the Air Force. Flight finally arrived in Chicago. The squadron, they landed right in the lake, received by hundreds of thousands of Chicagoans. We cheered louder, of course, than the Italian Americans and the Italian National School stand here. Once they landed, after the mooring exercises were over, the crews boarded small rowboats that took them ashore, and there they began some very intensive festivities for the next few days. Chicago and the United States had just crammed the program with banquets and receptions. Everybody wanted to honor Balbo and his comrades when possible. The men were almost worn completely out from the amount of banquets and receptions and dinners that they were obliged to attend. Italy was very much represented at the World's Fair, and aeronautically minded, the lines of the Italian pavilion were designed to suggest an airplane and even a seaplane with the porthole type windows, which are the same type of windows that the airplanes used in the flight had incorporated with them. So we see suggestive of flight even in the architecture of the pavilion. And of course, on display in the pavilion, very heavy on aeronautics and technology. That's what Italy was trying to promote for itself at the time. Balbo himself became an international hero. He was honored in everything from cartoons to advertisements for aeronautical products in both Italy, United States, England, everywhere in the world. Matter of fact, the English Air Force came up with a term for any group formation flight. They called it a Balbo. That was the English term for the English Air Force. Chicago, the city itself, had a lot of monuments in commemoration. We still have this to this day, commemorating the flight. The most visible, of course, is Balbo Avenue, Balbo Drive in Grant Park, and of course there's the Roman column in Burnham Park along Lakeshore Drive, which was a gift from the Italian government to Italy. It's a Roman column from Austria Antica in Italy. And then there's a Columbus monument that most people don't associate with Balbo. It was unveiled in August of 33. And inscribed on it, most people don't associate in the corner, it says this monument has seen the wings of Italy, led by Italo Balbo. So that is the third civic monument to Balbo and his accomplishment. Balbo made the front page of practically every publication in the nation. The entry to Chicago newspapers gave him probably the most space, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a major newspaper anywhere that didn't have his photograph on the cover page. That made him very, very popular. At that time, I believe it was the U.S. Commissioner to the World's Fair, Henry New, who said that if Balbo had decided to run for president in the summer of 1933, and the U.S. Constitution would allow it, that he would certainly be elected. To give you an idea of the scale of his popularity, it was almost a mania that summer. Parades, when of course, they had a parade down Michigan Avenue. That's their route to Soldier Field, and after they had landed, when they went to New York, they were, of course, given the traditional ticker tape parade. Everywhere they went, there was hundreds of thousands of people. They began to show the strain. You could see the weariness on their face. By Wednesday, they were just about at it. So they had to leave to get some rest. Quite an accomplishment.